The second time my nephew Douglas asked to borrow money, he brought his wife. I noted that detail at the time and filed it without fully understanding what I was filing. March 2020. Jean had been dead 14 months. Douglas and his wife Carol sat in my kitchen in Crown Drive, and Carol did most of the talking, which I also noted because Carol had never been the talker in the 11 years I had known her. The amount was £18,000. Business cash flow, Douglas said. 6 weeks at most, he said. Carol looked at her hands when he said 6 weeks. I gave him the £18,000. I want to tell you what I observed in the 3 years that followed that conversation. But first I need to tell you why I gave him the money, because the why is the part nobody ever discusses honestly. And the why is the only part that is actually useful to you. I gave him the money because I had sold my pharmacy in 2005 for a sum that people in Inverness knew about in the approximate way that people in small towns know things. Not precisely, but directionally. And I had spent the 15 years since that sale trying to make sure the money didn't change how people saw me. Giving it away, when asked, was how I managed that anxiety. I had not known that about myself until I was sitting in this kitchen at 88, working out why I'd said yes 11 times across 4 years to 5 different people. And the sum across those 11 occasions was £61,400. My reading glasses are on top of my head. I just reached to put them on. They were already there. The journalist who spent a morning with Alistair Drummond in Inverness in the autumn of 2023 noted that he spoke about these events with something closer to curiosity than bitterness, turning each incident over as if examining it for the first time, though the evidence suggested he had examined it many times before. He pushed his glasses up to his forehead twice before the first hour was done, not appearing to notice either time. The first person I need to describe is a woman named Eileen Rattray. She was not family. She had been a customer at the pharmacy since 1978. A good customer, reliable. A woman who collected her husband's heart medication every fortnight without fail for 22 years until he died in 2001. After that, she came in occasionally for her own prescriptions, and we would exchange a few words. Friendly, appropriate. The kind of acquaintance that accumulates across decades in a small shop. In November of 2019, 5 months after Jean died, Eileen arrived at my door on Crown Drive. Not the shop, the house. I observed this as unusual but ascribed it to the bereavement. She had a casserole dish. What I observed over the following 6 months was a pattern I have since documented in 3 other cases, with sufficient consistency to state it as a finding rather than a suspicion. The casserole dish was the opening. The following visits were shorter and more purposeful. By April of 2020, 7 months after the first visit, Eileen mentioned, in the course of a conversation about the cost of heating oil, that her grandson was trying to establish himself as a joiner and was looking for tools, and did I know anyone who might help him get started? The ask was so lightly done I almost didn't register it as an ask. The amount she eventually named, on a third visit, after 2 more conversations about her grandson's prospects, was £3,200 for tools, which he needed urgently because he'd been offered a contract that would start in a fortnight. I want to stop here and describe what £3,200 is in the context of a recently widowed 83-year-old living alone in Inverness in 2020, because I think that context is lost when people hear numbers. £3,200 is not a catastrophe. It is not a life-ruining sum, and that is precisely why it works. The ask is sized to sit below the threshold at which a person of means feels entitled to say no. Above that threshold, refusal is socially permitted. Below it, refusal starts to feel like a statement about your character. Eileen understood that threshold with the precision of someone who had been observing it for some time. I do not know whether consciously. What I observed was that the outcome was identical either way. I gave her the £3,200. The grandson's joinery career, to my knowledge, did not flourish. The tools, if purchased, were not visible in any subsequent conversation. The second case I observed was a man named Robert Chisholm, distant family, Jean's side, the kind of relation who appears at funerals and weddings and otherwise occupies a pleasant background position in your life. Robert was in his mid-50s in 2020. He worked in some capacity involving vehicles. I was never certain of the specifics, which in hindsight is itself a data point. Robert's approach was structurally different from Eileen's, and I note the difference because the difference matters for what you need to watch for. Eileen built slowly. 6 months from casserole dish to ask. Robert compressed the same process into 6 weeks. He called in January 2021, expressed condolences about Jean, 14 months after her death, which I also noted, and moved within 2 phone calls to a business proposition. Not a loan, a proposition. An opportunity involving a logistics company in the Central Belt that was expanding and needed investors at what Robert called the ground level. The amount? £22,000. I want to tell you what Robert offered that Eileen did not, because it is the specific thing that made his approach more effective, despite being more transparent. Robert offered me a role. Not just money out, money working, money earning. Money as evidence that I was still capable of the kind of judgment I had exercised for 41 years behind a pharmacy counter. He was not asking me to give. He was inviting me to participate. At 84, living alone, 17 months into widowhood, that invitation carried a weight I was not prepared for. The evidence suggested I understood it was a bad investment at the time I agreed to it. What I observed in my own reasoning was that the investment was not the real transaction. I gave him £22,000. The logistics company, as best I can determine, existed in some form for approximately 8 months before Robert stopped returning calls about it. Now I'll tell you about Douglas and the £18,000 and why his approach was the most sophisticated of the 3. Though sophisticated is a strange word to use about your own nephew. Douglas had the advantage of legitimacy. He was actual family. The relationship had genuine history, birthdays remembered, Sunday lunches, a loan of £800 in 2011 that he had repaid in full. That repaid £800 was doing considerable work in the conversation in March 2020, though neither of us mentioned it. It didn't need to be mentioned. It was present in the room like a character reference that had arrived before Douglas did. What I observed, looking back at the sequence from 2020 to 2023, was that the repaid £800 from 2011 was the cost of the March 2020 transaction, an investment with a 9-year return. I have no evidence this was deliberate. The pattern was consistent with deliberate planning. It was also consistent with a man who borrows money when he needs it, and sometimes repays it, and sometimes does not. I am genuinely uncertain which is accurate. The glasses on my head. I am reaching for them again. Douglas did not repay the £18,000. The conversation in which I raised it, September 2022, produced a detailed account of ongoing difficulties and a counter-observation that I had more than enough and that family should be different from a bank. I noted his word choice. More than enough. He had sized the £18,000 the same way Eileen had sized the £3,200. Below the threshold at which the person with means feels entitled to object. The difference was that Douglas also believed what he said. That is what made it the most sophisticated of the 3 cases. He was not cynical about it. He genuinely believed the money was there, that family should share it, and that raising the matter formally made me the problem in the situation. That is the version you need to watch for, not the obvious predator. The person who has genuinely decided that your money is, in some moral sense, partially theirs, and who will be sincerely confused and hurt when you disagree. You are watching this, and you have already thought of at least one person who fits one of these 3 patterns. Not necessarily with the same amounts. The amounts are not the point. The pattern is someone who knows your approximate position, who approaches during or after a period of loss or transition, who sizes the ask to sit below your refusal threshold, and who offers you something in exchange, a role, a relationship, a sense of continued usefulness, that you need more than you realize at the time they offer it. That is the transaction. The money is just how it clears. The thing that has occupied me most in the 5 years since I stopped giving money away, and I stopped specifically in November 2023, after sitting down with Fiona and going through the full £61,400 across 11 transactions, is not the loss of the money. The money is gone, and I am 88, and the arithmetic of regret at 88 is different than it would be at 68. What occupies me is the question of what I was actually purchasing across those 11 transactions. What I observed was that each transaction temporarily relieved a specific pressure. The pressure of being known to have means and needing to justify having them. The pressure of being the person in the room who could help and choosing not to. The pressure of widowhood, which produces a specific hunger to be needed that nobody prepares you for, and that bad actors, conscious or not, can locate the way a symptom locates a weakness. I was purchasing relief. At rates that would have horrified the pharmacist I used to be. A pharmacist knows, the thing that provides relief is not always the thing that treats the condition. Sometimes it masks it long enough for the condition to go further than it would have gone otherwise. I treated my loneliness with other people's urgency for 4 years. It did not make me less alone. It made me 61,400 pounds lighter and somewhat more certain about who, in my life, had ever actually been present versus who had simply been patient. Tell your daughter, tell your son, tell the one person you trust completely with the specific number, not to protect the money, to have a witness. Because the transactions I describe do not happen when there is a witness in the room, a real one with authority to ask questions and receive honest answers. Eileen's casserole dish does not arrive when Fiona is there. Robert's logistics company does not get mentioned when your GP daughter is sitting across the kitchen table. The money is less safe when only you know about it. Not because of theft, because of the hunger I described. And the hunger is harder to see in yourself than any symptom I ever observed across a pharmacy counter. Tell someone. Then the number isn't a secret. And a secret is exactly what makes it useful to someone who isn't you.